There's one concept that whenever I see people mention it in Smash Up, it always makes me cringe just a little. People overuse this word when sometimes they should be just saying bad instead. However, Grannies, today's faction, are one of the 4 factions that I would personally call support. The other 3 are Dinosaurs, Time Travelers, and Ghosts. And while these 4 factions share nothing obvious in terms of their gameplay mechanics, they all have similar characteristics when you look at their statistics in how they perform with various partners. Now, I gotta cover one more thing before I can tell you how good Grannies are, because they're gonna vary based on how your group plays. Here's a line with a continuum of different ways you can build your decks in Smash Up. On one end, we have completely random faction selection. Well, and there's something called backdraft that probably nobody ever plays. That would be even farther over. And then, 2 times number of players snake drafts are over here. 2 times number of players plus 1 through 3 are a little bit closer. And then you have this big gulf. And all sorts of gentlemen's agreements, and I'm not playing as hard as possible because I want to try different decks so that they're interesting, fall in this middle gap. I think most groups actually end up playing in the middle gap, even though they don't have a rule set that restricts them to it. But on the right side over here, which I'm getting a little confused about because it's my left side, we get methods that allow weak factions to show up only when they work unusually well, and for groups that fall in this side, support factions like Grannies are going to do really, really well. Think about how much stronger Alien Time Travelers is in a 2-player game than, even relative to other Aliens decks, than Random Faction plus Time Travelers would be. Free selection with bans is, farther this way, and free selection with no bans, and you're allowing every faction and you can pick the most broken combinations is all the way over here. My rating lists probably work about with the 2n+3 stuff somewhere over here. I want to pay more attention to how do factions do in a wide variety of situations than I do to how good is the absolute best deck that happens to use this one faction. An awful lot of factions are going to perform about equally good in terms of where they fall from number 1 to number 55 on the list, whether you're over here or over here. But the support factions care a lot more. Support factions are going to be really good over here because relative to other factions, their best decks are going to be better and their typical decks are going to be pretty bad. And this is because what the support factions have in common from a mechanics perspective is they don't provide a strong plan of their own that they can solo with, but in order to do their own limited job, they don't consume a lot of your minion plays, a lot of your action plays, and a lot of the space in your hand. Some factions like Apes will be huge hogs on all your action plays. A faction like Rockstars or Astronauts will eat up a ton of space in your hand. These are more carry factions in that they need your resources to do their job, and if you can't give them resources, they're not going to be very good. The support factions demand very few resources, and they don't give you a lot, but what they give you may be exactly what the partner needs. So of these 4 factions, Dinosaurs are going to shine when their partner wants all the minion and action plays, but also wants some kind of counterpunch on demand. Ghosts can do the same job, but since Ghosts also want card draw, Ghosts tend to end up doing this job for rush decks, while Dinosaurs are more likely to do it for control decks. By the way, a common theme with all these support factions is that the factions they work really well with tend to be factions that are really good, sometimes to the point of brokenness, and more often the factions they don't work well with are average to bad factions themselves. So the support factions are kind of natural late picks in a draft anyway. Time Travelers just need a partner with lots of broken actions to duplicate. And now it's finally time for me to talk about the Grannies. The Grannies need a partner who can win the game solo when only provided with lots of exactly the right cards. Now, lots of exactly the right cards is even more of a help than the other three support factions provide, but win the game solo is also an even harder demand than the other support factions make. Dinosaurs give you a bunch of extra size beyond the normal 30 minion power and a little bit of removal. Ghosts give you a lot of burst and some removal, which it's also nice because their removal is minion-based and there's a number of ways to block action-based removal. Time Travelers give you removal via bounce that works on actions as well as minions. But as far as cards that directly impact the board, Grannies give you one extra minion play and one action removal card. Although they can kill 3 actions with that card, it's still only 1. And that is nothing compared to what most factions give you. Nana can also give you up to 3 extra actions. I don't count Granny's Purse here because it only replaces the action play you spent on it, so it's a cantrip rather than an actual way to double up actions. But Nana is only going to help you if the Granny's partner faction has actions worth doubling up on, because the Granny's actions don't actually do anything other than provide you with even more cards or maybe cantrip themselves. By the way, most Grannies decks perform pretty consistently because they have lots of card draw and deck sifting. When you get a winning matchup with a Grannies deck, you're probably going to win it close to every time. When you get a losing matchup with a Grannies deck, you're probably going to lose it close to every time too. And this made the Grannies look even worse than they really were at me for their first 10 to 20 games I played with them, because I was playing them in, versus a lot of average decks and going, well, they seem to lose every time against average decks where they've got an average partner. Well, yeah, they're a consistent faction. So, when can a Grannies deck succeed? First off, if you're facing a lot of minion removal and the opposing deck doesn't have much in the way of a plan that doesn't rely on wearing you out with minion removal, the Grannies are really good at power drawing through this. Unfortunately, in recent expansions, the only focused minion removal faction we've seen is the Sharks, and that's been more than a year ago by now. So this is a strategy that's been getting more and more diluted over time, and so far I haven't seen any indication that we're going to get more factions that rely on heavy minion removal in order to win games. So this is not as useful a characteristic as it would have been if, say, the Grannies were in the core set. If you can't rely on outmuscling a removal deck, you're going to need that kind of partner I mentioned earlier who wins the game solo. And I actually went through my whole collection, every faction, to see who could possibly fit the bill. Aliens in 1v1, of course, because the Grannies help you draw Invader, and that's when the aliens lose a 1v1 game, it's frequently due to just not being able to draw Invader. Granny robots are probably good, but I mean, that's robots. Granny zombies are surprisingly not as good as you might think they are. The thing is, zombies do their job reliably without the Grannies' help, and the Grannies don't add any new tricks besides extra reliability that the zombies already had without the Grannies' help. The zombies also, their problems tend to come when they don't draw enough minions early and end up with a bunch of actions, and the fact that the Grannies' actions just sort of target your own cards. This doesn't necessarily make Granny zombies any more consistent at avoiding bad starts than any other zombies deck. Ghosts and plants should appreciate the Grannies, since both factions have a tendency to end up with an empty hand. The ghosts, of course, love all forms of card draw. Plants are also capable of accelerating themselves something crazy early on if they've got enough cards, and then eventually tend to end up running out of minions in their deck because Sprout sifted them out. You might also get good results out of Granny Shapeshifters, although that's yet another thing I haven't tried. Do not try Innsmouth Grannies. Several of us on the Reddit, I think, said that, oh, this should be a great idea because we get all the deck manipulation and you can decide exactly what is where. Yes, but you don't have the muscle to do anything. You have all the deck manipulation in the world and you have a million ways to do not enough to actually break a base. It's actually quite horrible. Ape Grannies suffer from the same not enough flexibility problem that buries the zombie Grannies, but Spy Grannies can do quite a bit more than you might expect from a deck that has way too much deck manipulation. The trick with Spy Grannies is you want to bury more than one or more of your opponents with 3 quick copies of the Spy Who Ditched Me. You can draw these faster with the Grannies extra deck manipulation, and you can get one of them back with Chicken Soup. And the thing is, this card is something that occasionally just randomly wins games or randomly knocks somebody out of a game in multiplayer when you draw it early. And the ability to fairly quickly draw 3 of them and then focus your operatives on denying your opponent or opponent's minion draws can turn it into a deck that works kind of like a minion removal deck without having minion removal. You just force your opponent onto the back foot by the fact that they have to skip their minion plays because they have no minions in hand. You set up, and then you end up taking a lead and winning the game before your opponent actually gets back in it. Your opponent is too far behind to successfully play around the spy specials. It's not exactly a great deck, but it's really, really funny when it works. Getting a little bit more recent, Grannies can enable horses to keep rushing, of course, because a horse rush that never ends is really scary. They can also help the kitty cats draw into a good hand. One of the things I've noticed when playing the kitty cats is you sometimes end up just drawing the wrong stuff, and you have to sit there and desperately play your own minion and sacrifice it to cat fight in order to try to draw into a hand that can actually do something. And well, the Grannies mean that they aren't going to add great things to the kitty cats, but you're always going to have a decent kitty cat's hand. I don't think I'd want to play the Grannies with anything from either the Monster Smash or Munchkin formats, Munchkin expansions. I mean, you could try Granny Warriors, but I don't think it's going to be good. On the other hand, Granny Dragons are a standout faction because the Dragons are a pretty strong faction whose main weakness is that they have a lot of ways to play extra cards, and when you kill the Imperial Dragons, they don't have enough ways to draw into those extra cards that allow them to dominate you. Well, Granny Dragons don't care if you kill the Imperial. They're still drawing a ton of all the right cards, and you're going to get buried under 2 ruins, plus returning 1 ruin from your discard to play, plus a Great Worm, plus the Wyverns are going to give them some spot removal. It's going to be a huge pain to deal with most of the time. And as far as the good newer factions, some of the Rush factions we've got have a tendency with hand overfilling, and really both Granny Astronites and Granny Rockstars end up wasting draw that the Astronites and Rockstars bring themselves. Granny Teddies don't really do enough, but Granny All-Stars are probably pretty terrifying. A combo faction with, what, 3 Ghostly Arrivals and 2 King Rexes, depending on how you play your cards that duplicate other cards, that's going to hurt a lot if you draw them fast. One final note about the Grannies. When you find yourself facing a Grannies combo I haven't listed, stop to think about all the different things the Grannies partner faction can do. You have 2 factions resources against 1 enhanced faction, and your opponent isn't going to have as many different options as you do. You can often hold defensive positions against the Grannies that wouldn't work if you were facing 2 opposing factions. Granny Ninjas seemed like a workable idea to me until I tried playing them and remembered that ninjas have 0 burst. And most other factions are going to have some weakness like that that you can play against if they get paired with the Grannies. Happy smashing!